Akwaba, welcome back. If you're just now joining us, we are discussing the topic of liberation Pan-Africanness. This will be a two-part episode, with this first part discussing Pan-Africanness of the continent, and the next episode, part two, will be liberation activists from the diaspora. For our African discussion, we will explore liberators in the persons of Amilcar Cabral, Thomas Sankara, and Dr. Michere Githe Mugo. These brave, powerful people were proponents of a united global people of African descent, with the goal of restoring our people to our proper place on the world stage of history, culture, and policymaking. To begin, let me briefly review the definition of Pan-Africanism. It is the idea that people of African descent, continental and diasporian, must unite based on our shared origins, history, culture, struggles, and achievements. As a unifying philosophy, Pan-Africanism developed as an essential idea in the aftermath of enslavement, colonialism, and segregation as a strategy to wholeness. It is a concept intended to reorient our worldview, our thinking about who we are in the world, and our relationships to each other. Pan-Africanism was and is about self-love, self-determination, and self-reliance, and is vital to our full recovery from the madness of the last 400 years. To be clear, white supremacy as a power juggernaut encompassed all aspects of oppression against people of African descent on the continent and in the diaspora. Breaking the yoke of white supremacy required an idea such as Pan-Africanism that unified the people with the belief that solidarity would enable a continent rich with resources, along with African people worldwide, that is, have been dispersed throughout the world, to capture our potential. Pan-Africanism would facilitate an alliance that would empower African people globally. Without a doubt, the global unity of African people would accrue enormous benefits that include economic, social, political, military, philosophical, and spiritual in health and wealth. Part of what we must be willing to do today is actively work for the connection that leads to empowerment. The other term for this work is struggle. The wise, sage, and legendary freedom fighter, the Honorable and esteemed Frederick Douglass, told us emphatically, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it will never do so. Douglass's insight remains a most profound truth. The struggle, as it has played out in various places, was both moral and physical. Liberation fighters from the motherland to the diaspora were committed and willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to liberate our people. Two people who made that ultimate sacrifice are Amilcar Cabral and Thomas Sankara. Born in Cape Verde in 1924, Amilcar Cabral waged one of the most successful wars for independence from a colonial power on the continent. One of Africa's preeminent leaders against colonialism, Cabral was an agricultural and engineer, political organizer, revolutionary theoretician, and diplomat. He was also a poet. Like other leaders of freedom movements on the continent, Cabral was university educated and had connected with fellow students involved in various liberation movements to strategize and develop political theories regarding colonialism and how to defeat it. Cabral became one of the foremost intellectuals and theoreticians on the subject. He wrote skillfully and left a body of literature on the effects of the colonized identity and its danger to true liberation. Cabral co-founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, PAIGC, in 1956. As a revolutionary theorist and agronomist, one who specializes in soils and plants, Cabral taught his soldiers how to live off the land and work alongside local farmers, building goodwill and community. His guerrilla warfare was succeeding, and in 1972, he prepared to declare independence from Portugal through the establishment of the Guinean People's National Assembly. As an all too familiar pattern, internal factions developed and disgruntled former soldiers and officials began to plot against Cabral and, most egregiously, worked with the Portuguese colonial agents. A year later, Cabral was executed by traitorous former soldiers. Those plotting soldiers and officials, about 100 of them, were in turn executed by Cabral's military without delay. Cabral's half-brother Louis took up the mantle of leadership and continued the struggle. 8 months later, after Amilcar's assassination, the PAIGC declared independence from Portugal, driving the colonizers out of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, naming Louis Cabral president. I especially want to emphasize that Cabral envisioned what he called re-Africanization, with the goal of embracing African indigenous culture. Culture, for Cabral, was a key component. He envisioned his country developing an African sensibility, socially, psychologically, and culturally, complete with a nationalistic spirit. He called this idea returning to the source, and it was to be a feature component for a truly liberated Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. His astute understanding and vision to address the psychological component of our oppression is still needed today. Famed Brazilian educator activist Paulo Freire drew heavily upon the education philosophy of Cabral, according to an article by Curry Malott, entitled How Amilcar Cabral Shaped Paulo Freire's Pedagogy. Malott notes that Cabral encouraged decolonizing knowledge, especially as it related to embracing of African traditional cultures. Cabral wrote, and I quote, "As long as a people have a cultural life, foreign domination cannot be in its perpetuation." Cabral is convinced that cultural resistance in its myriad of manifestations must contest foreign imposition. This is where our cultural observances from Black History Month, African Liberation Day, and Kwanzaa must be contextualized. They contain the power of cultural resistance and are powerful reminders of who we are. But I digress. Cabral's call for re-Africanization was not to live in the past, but to assert self-determination in our own image. Freire, author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a celebrated book detailing his own journey of educating Brazilians towards political empowerment, considered Cabral a, and I quote, revolutionary educator. He called Cabral, and I quote again, one of those leaders always with the people, teaching and learning mutually in the liberation struggle. It made sense that after Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde declared independence, Freire contributed to analyzing and dismantling the colonial education that was put in place by the Portuguese. One of the things the new government did to accelerate what Cabral called return to the source was to immediately replace curricula that was steeped in a Eurocentric, colonialist worldview. Students no longer learned history from the colonizer's perspective. The history was not only taught from the perspective of formerly colonized, but also included the history of liberation struggle. Imagine that. Clearly a lesson we still need today. Recognition of Cabral's legacy is global and includes countries in Europe as well as Africa. In Cape Verde, the international airport is named for him. In Guinea-Bissau, a private university also bears his name, as does a football competition, the Emir Cabral Cup. Fidel Castro called him, and I quote, one of the most lucid and brilliant leaders in Africa who instilled in us tremendous confidence in the future, end quote. Considered as significant as Frantz Fanon and Che Guevara, Cabral was voted the second greatest leader in the world in a poll conducted by the BBC World History magazine in March 2020. We'll be right back.